thought it strange on a day when we're thinking of our armed forces that things are moving on in Russia at the moment. Very interesting to watch if you know what to watch out for, but we've got an expert to talk to because Vladimir Putin has vowed to punish those involved in the Wagner rebellion in a televised address to the nation.
Yeah, the speech comes after a morning of skirmishes between the Russian army and the previously loyal mercenary group, which is led by Prigozhin.
Well, let's find out more about this story because I think it will come as a surprise to a lot of people what's been going on in Russia. Let's talk to Robert Fox, defence editor at the Evening Standard and, again, a friend of the programme. Hello there, Robert. It's good to talk to you.
Hello.
Can you explain to us, for those of us who haven't been following everything about the Wagner rebellion, what's been going on?
Well, Wagner is a private military company. It's a private army, but working to the Russian state. And they've done a lot of the fighting in Ukraine. It's been going for quite some time, particularly in Africa, by the way. But they have taken a disproportionate amount of casualties. This is the point that you have to realize about what's going on now, is that in the heavy fighting round Bakhmut, it was the Wagner soldiers, and a lot of them were pretty raw. They'd come out of prisons, they had been convicts, and they have taken a lot of the casualties, and they complained of being deprived of ammunition and full support from the Russian army. Now, we've got to a stage where the man in charge, who was a great pal of Putin on his rise to power to the presidency, a man called Yevgeny Prigozhin, as you rightly say, he's had enough. He's had enough of the way the Russians are running this war in Ukraine. He's pulled his troops back, and they've gone back into Russia to two crucial places, Rostov-on-Don, from which they mount a lot of the operation in Ukraine, and now in Voronezh. And there we have seen pictures already of Prigozhin sitting down with the local commanders and saying enough is enough. And the local commanders seem to be having an open dialogue with them.
What's going to happen next? I mean, it sounds highly dangerous.
Well, Vladimir Putin, in his speech, has mentioned the M word, mutiny, which is very serious indeed. And he has always said the Ukraine war or the special military operation has been a problem because Russia is being attacked by NATO and its allies, including the UK and the US. Now he's saying Russian forces are being attacked by Russian forces. And this is a huge problem because this could be the inklings, the beginnings, small details of certainly tensions, possibly local civil wars. By the way, the kinds of things that dictators like Putin, and as one is one allowed to use the expression with G, fear the most. They fear spontaneous uprisings. And I think that this is what we're facing now. And for the moment, the Russians are pretty stuck as to how to deal with it. They think they can deal with it because there are only about 25,000, 30,000 Wagnerites involved. But what do they use to put them down? Now, I've been getting telegram feeds overnight that the people that they would call out, the security police, the FSB and the GRU locally around Rostov and Voronezh have been called out. But it's a Friday night. It's been a Friday night. And what happens on Friday night, most of these that have been turning up, according to my informants, and they are biased, I do agree, they've either been drunk or suffering from massive hangovers. So Putin has got a morale problem and a discipline problem on his hands. And that's why the MOD, the British MOD, just put out a comment from their defense intelligence. This is the most important challenge to Putin's power since he rose to power at the beginning of this century, 2002.
Putin is not a man renowned for his compassion when it comes to dealing with his opponents. He puts journalists in jail, even pop stars like Pussy Riot in jail. These people are going to get pretty swift retribution. If he's using words like mutiny, it sounds to me like this is heading for a major confrontation.
Look, yes, but he's a winner. And Putin has got to be sure that he's going to win. How much has he and his commanders had to rely on Wagner in Ukraine, particularly since last summer? And the answer is a lot. And how unique is Prigozhin? Not unique. There are other militias, there are other warlords, there are people like Kadyrov from the Chechens. Now, they will all be taking their cue. They're going to watch what is happening to Prigozhin. As one of the commentators, I think Mr. McFall, the former US ambassador, now a professor, the US ambassador to Russia, put it couldn't have come at a better time for the Ukrainians, who are under pressure with their counteroffensive, having a great deal of difficulty, as Zelensky has admitted, because of the battle for the close air, as it were, attack helicopters and so on, and the fact that they're trying to move tanks relatively underprotected over open ground. That has been an acute problem for the Ukrainians. All this, on the other side, could not have come at a better time. But it's related to other things. We've got to start joining the dots to really get the big picture. And I think the attack on the bridges to Crimea is a significant part in this tension of things snapping at the end of the week with the Wagner mercenaries.
And as you say, if it in a way is good news for Ukraine, at least in the short term, how dangerous is a very angry Putin who's concerned about sort of little civil wars going on?
Well, although, and we have discussed this, all of us, on GB News and elsewhere, the state of mind of Vladimir Putin. And I have to say, in a sort of coldly cynical way, on the whole, he's been quite sane. You can, in Putin land, if you can get the logic of Putin land, about the great Russia and so on, and little nations are not really nations at all, like Ukraine, not that it is a little nation, all that is understandable. Now your question, what happens when that flips? When he is absolutely desperate, when he does see that he's under pressure? Yes, military vehicles and so on have been on the streets in Moscow overnight. Is that gesture? Or does he sense a real element of personal threat to him in this? Open question. It's a question will be resolved in the next 48 hours. And he could go bonkers. By the way, I still think the nuclear threat is bluff, because if he uses those weapons that he's moved into Belarus, it's toast for a lot of people, I'm sorry to say, but it's certainly toast for Vladimir Putin.
But you think we'll know... you think something will happen in the next 24 hours?
24 to 48 hours. If you think what happened at the end of communism in 1990-91 and the coup, and then it failed against Gorbachev, which brought Yeltsin to power, remember, standing on top of his tank, and really a very important moment in world history as well as Russian history. I don't like to say never, and journalists make lousy profits, by the way. We have no more control and understanding of the future than anybody. I prefer my friend Darren, the big issue seller, to really inform you on this, because he knows what's going on in the street. But I would guess, yes, it's when you feel momentum is happening, and this is 56 years in journalism. Momentum doesn't go in a line. I mean, from anything we were commemorating Armed Forces Day, and I remember in the Falklands when the surrenders came. They didn't come in a logical sequence. They suddenly break. Think water rather than bricks and mortar. And I think that this is what's flowing around, swirling around. And you must look at those borderlands between Ukraine and Russia. Crimea, Belgorod, Rostov-on-Don, which is the logistical base. It's the base for supply, and Voronezh. And above all, what Prigozhin has done, he said, Mr. President, and they've not named each other in this, you've got a situation on your hands.
Before we let you go, Robert, obviously we all remember your part in the Falklands War, one of the best and thus the most famous journalists engaged in that. What are your thoughts on this Armed Forces Day?
I have a simple thought for you now. I was listening to our colleague, the veteran from Invictus. Actually, I have a message for the government, and it's absolutely crude, and it's a message for any government. You've got to pay your soldiers more. You've got to pay everybody at the bottom end in public service. You've got to reward them to make them feel that what they do, whether it's a policeman, whether you're looking at pollution in rivers and seas, or fighting for king and country, but your job is worth it. And, Andrew, it's well worth asking those guys who paraded brilliantly at Trooping the Colour a week ago. Ask what they took home a month. And you'll be quite surprised.
Yes, that is sombre, but I think people are probably agreeing with you up and down the country. Thank you so much for your thoughts, because they're always worth having.
Yeah.